Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. Nathaniel Nate Harrington gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles as his vintage Mustang sputtered and died in the middle of the road. The roar of passing traffic only amplified his frustration. He had spent countless hours restoring this car, a symbol of his climb from poverty to success, and now it had betrayed him right when he needed it most. "Not today," he muttered, slamming his palm against the dashboard. His phone buzzed with another message from the hospital about his mother's deteriorating condition. Celeste Harrington, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him alone after his father abandoned them, was fighting for her life in the ICU. Nate pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Genevieve's contact. His relationship with his wife had grown strained over the past months, but surely she would understand the gravity of this situation. They had once been the golden couple in their circle, the self-made tech mogul and the stunning socialite with architectural ambitions. The phone rang 3 times before Genevieve's voice cut through, breathy and irritated. "What is it, Nate?" Something about her tone made him pause. Background noises filtered through, rustling fabric, a male voice murmuring indistinctly. Nate's jaw clenched. "My car broke down," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I need a ride to the hospital. Mum's condition is critical." A pause stretched between them, filled with more suspicious rustling. Then Genevieve's voice returned, dripping with mock sweetness that made his blood run cold. "Oh, that's unfortunate. You know what? Get in Hubert, Nate. I'm in the middle of a chill date with my lover, Netflix and all. You know how it is." Her words slammed into him like physical blows, each one calculated to wound. But it was her next statement that ignited something dark within him. "Don't worry too much about your mommy. Bye." The line went dead with a sharp click. Nate stared at his phone, a cold rage crystallizing in his chest. The woman he had given everything, mansion, cars, lavish lifestyle, had just dismissed his dying mother while flaunting her infidelity. In that moment, something fundamental shifted within Nathaniel Harrington. The devoted husband who had worked tirelessly to build a perfect life died, replaced by something harder, colder, more dangerous. He opened his rideshare app, his mind already calculating the first moves in what would become an intricate game of revenge. The car arrived within minutes. As Nate settled into the back seat, he pulled up his contacts list and spoke into the phone. "Richard, I need you to start surveillance on Genevieve. Full coverage. No limit on resources. And Richard, I want to know everything about her lover too." His head of security's response was swift. "Of course, sir. I'll have a team in place within the hour." Nate ended the call, staring out the window as the city blurred past. His thoughts drifted to Celeste, the fierce woman who had taught him never to back down from a fight. She had warned him about Genevieve from the start, seeing through the polished exterior to the social climber beneath. "Your father was the same way," Celeste had once told him. "All charm on the surface, rot underneath." Nate should have heeded her warning. The hospital loomed ahead, its sterile walls enclosing the only person who had never betrayed him. As he strode through the corridors toward the ICU, Nate's phone buzzed with the first updates from his security team. He glanced at the message. An address, a name, Graham Sutton, and preliminary surveillance photos. His wife's lover, the man who had helped wreck Nate's marriage while Celeste lay dying. Nate committed every detail to memory, filing them away for future use. They would both pay for this betrayal. But first, his mother needed him. Celeste's room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitoring equipment. She looked so small in the hospital bed, her usual vibrancy dimmed by illness. Nate took her hand, noting how fragile it felt in his grip. "I'm here, Mom," he whispered, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm sorry I'm late, but I promise you this. I'll make things right. They'll regret crossing us." Celeste's fingers twitched in his grip, as though acknowledging his vow. Nate sat back, his other hand still clutching his phone. Updates from his security team continued to pour in. Now he would be the dutiful son, but soon enough, Genevieve and her lover would learn exactly what happened to those who betrayed Nathaniel Harrington. Graham Sutton stood before his latest acquisition, a modernist painting worth more than most people made in a year. His gallery had become a gathering place for Redwood Corridor elites, letting him move smoothly through their world while quietly observing weaknesses. Having an affair with Nathaniel Harrington's wife was his most satisfying conquest yet. He remembered first meeting Nate, back when Graham had been commissioned to design promotional material for Harrington Tech. Nate was polite but distant, too focused on his own goals to notice how Graham's gaze lingered on Genevieve, or how she had begun to respond to his careful attention. The piece speaks to the fundamental isolation of modern existence, Graham explained to his newest client, using his practiced charm to mask darker thoughts. Notice how the brushstrokes create a sense of yearning. The wealthy collector nodded, taken in by Graham's performance. Reading people, finding their vulnerabilities, and exploiting them was what he did best. Genevieve had been almost too easy. Her dissatisfaction with her marriage was obvious to Graham's trained eye. His phone vibrated. Another message from Genevieve. Over the past year, he had cultivated her dependence on him, systematically undermining her marriage. Every complaint about Nate's long hours, each suggestion that she was merely a trophy wife, every reminder of her abandoned dreams, all carefully planted and nurtured until they took root. "Excuse me," Graham said, smiling at the collector. "An urgent matter requires my attention." In his office, Graham read Genevieve's message. "Nate called. His car broke down. I told him about us." Graham's fingers tightened around his phone. This was not part of the plan. He wanted to maintain secrecy until he had fully secured his position. Why would she do that? He typed back, "Why would you tell him?" He wanted a ride to the hospital. His mother's dying. "I was drunk and angry. I don't know. I just wanted to hurt him." Graham leaned back in his leather chair, considering the implications. He had underestimated Genevieve's capacity for cruelty, almost equal to his own. Still, this pushed his timeline forward. He replied, "Come to the cabin. We need to talk." Their secret hideaway, registered under a shell company, had been the site of countless trysts. Graham had selected it carefully so it could never be traced back to him. As he drove there, he savored how perfectly Genevieve had fallen into his hands. She was pacing the main room when he arrived, designer heels, paid for with Nate's money, clicking against polished floors. She radiated excitement about their secret finally being revealed. "Do you realize what you've done?" Graham demanded, the charm in his voice slipping away. "Nathaniel Harrington isn't someone to toy with." Genevieve waved dismissively. "Nate's harmless. He'll be hurt, maybe angry, but he'll get over it. He always does." "You don't understand men like your husband," Graham said, pouring himself a drink. "They don't reach his level by being harmless when betrayed. Are you afraid of him?" Genevieve challenged, lips curving in a mocking smile. Graham's grip on his glass tightened. "I'm aware of his capabilities, something you should be, after all these years of marriage." She rolled her eyes. "Please, I've seen Nate build his empire. He's a coder at heart, all about contracts and deals. He doesn't have it in him to really hurt anyone." Graham studied her carefully, wondering if she truly believed that or just preferred to lie to herself. He had glimpsed the steely core beneath Nate's seemingly mild demeanor during their brief business encounters. "We need to be smart," he said, moving closer. "Now that he knows, we have to control the narrative. Are you ready?" Genevieve pressed against him, perfume filling his senses. "I've been playing roles my whole life, darling. Tell me what to do." As Graham outlined his strategy, he withheld his true objective. Genevieve was just another pawn, a way to access Nate's wealth and influence. "Poor Nate," Genevieve murmured, stroking Graham's chest. "All alone in the hospital while we're here together." "He made his choice," Graham said, tasting the expensive wine on her lips. "He put work above you. Now he learns the consequences." Neither of them realized that Nathaniel Harrington was already several steps ahead. His security team photographed them through the cabin windows, recorded their hushed conversations, and built a file that would help destroy them both. At the hospital, Celeste's condition worsened, while Nate split his attention between her bedside and his phone, absorbing every new piece of evidence. Each report from his security team exposed Genevieve's treachery, Graham's finances, his hidden dealings. Nate's face remained impassive as he read through the damning dossier. In that cool expression, only his clenched fist betrayed his fury. He had given Genevieve everything she'd ever wanted, and in return she had given herself to a man who had plotted against him from the start. "I see them clearly now, Mom," he whispered to Celeste's unconscious form. "Just like you always did. I promise. They won't get away with this." The hospital room fell silent as the monitors flatlined. Celeste Harrington slipped away quietly, her hand still held in her son's firm grip. Nate sat there, unmoving, as though frozen in that final moment. "Time of death, 11:42 p.m., the doctor murmured. Nate stood, his movements precise, every emotion walled behind control. "I'll need the death certificate," he said, voice devoid of warmth. Concerned looks passed among the staff, but Nate no longer cared about appearances. Outside in the hospital parking lot, he made 2 calls. The first went to his lawyer, Michael Ross. "Prepare the divorce papers immediately," Nate instructed, "and get everything ready for the company restructuring." "They're already drafted," Michael confirmed. "But are you sure about the other measures we discussed?" "They're extreme. She cheated on me while my mother was dying." Nate replied coldly. "Extreme doesn't begin to cover what they deserve." His second call was to Richard. "Implement Protocol 0. Everything in place by morning." "Yes, sir. The team reports your wife is still at the cabin with Graham. Should they intervene?" "No. Let them enjoy their last peaceful hours. Tomorrow, their world burns." Nate drove home in a company car. His Mustang had already been towed for repairs. The mansion, the epitome of his success, and Genevieve's appetite for luxury, rose before him like a monument to betrayal. He moved through the empty rooms with purpose, collecting every piece of evidence his security team had compiled. Photographs, receipts, call logs, text messages, anything linking Genevieve and Graham in their affair. In his study, he spread the evidence across Genevieve's cherished designer desk, the one she had begged for under the pretense of reigniting her architectural dreams. Now it would serve a far more punitive function. The divorce papers went on top with a short note in his neat handwriting. "Our vows were a lie. You are free to run to your lover. I promise your life will be a nightmare." Next, he headed to the garage, where Genevieve's custom convertible still shone. He had chosen that car for her as an anniversary present, once believing it would make her happy. Now it would deliver a different message. With methodical calm, he doused the interior in gasoline. The fumes were suffocating, but Nate took his time, letting his rage simmer. Outside, he paused to light a cigarette, an old habit he had quit years ago, for Genevieve's sake. He stared at the lighter, remembering every compromise he had made for a woman who never truly loved him. Then he flicked it toward the soaked interior. He watched the flames roar to life, consuming every inch of expensive leather. It was mesmerizing, as destructive and hypnotic as Genevieve herself. He stood until the fire began to weaken, leaving the car a scorched skeleton. It was a warning she could not possibly misunderstand. Satisfied, he checked his phone. Another surveillance update. Genevieve had left the cabin, heading home. Perfect. Nate took one last look at the glowing embers, then walked away. He had a funeral to arrange. After that, the real destruction would begin. He was no longer the caring husband or the grieving son. He was something new, forged by betrayal and tempered by grief. Let them think they'd succeeded in hurting him. Soon enough, they would know the price of crossing Nathaniel Harrington. Breaking news. Tech mogul Nathaniel Harrington's wife claims abuse in shocking interview. Genevieve Sterling Harrington dabbed at carefully contrived tears with a silk handkerchief. Across from her, the interviewer, Melinda Liu, leaned forward with concern. "Mrs. Harrington, these are very serious allegations. Can you tell us more about what you experienced?" Genevieve's voice quavered on cue. Nate always needed total control. The cars, the clothes, the house. They were chains, not gifts. "When I finally found the courage to leave," he snapped. "He burned my car, froze my accounts. He's trying to destroy me because I dared to be happy without him." Behind the camera, Graham Sutton observed proudly. He and Genevieve had rehearsed every line, crafting each lie to paint Nate as a monster and Genevieve as a tragic victim. She continued her performance, tearfully describing how she allegedly feared for her safety. In his office at Harrington Tech, Nate watched the interview with cool detachment. He texted Richard, "She's lying. How many provable falsehoods so far?" Richard replied immediately, 57. "Want us to release the counter-evidence?" "Not yet," Nate wrote back. "Let them bury themselves deeper." He switched screens to watch surveillance on Graham's gallery. Anonymous tips from Nate's team had already hinted at forgeries. Rumors began swirling among wealthy collectors about fraudulent authenticity certificates. Next, his phone rang. Michael Ross. They made their first major slip, Michael announced. "Graham used company funds to book that TV interview. That's misappropriation." "Good," Nate said. "Freeze his accounts. All of them." "Already done," Michael confirmed. "And the restraining order against both of them has been approved. They can't come within 500 feet of you or any Harrington Tech facility." Nate ended that call and turned back to one of his monitors, which displayed a scene at Graham's gallery. A furious client stormed out, canceling a $1 million purchase, just the first domino. Elsewhere, Genevieve tried to shop, only to have her credit card declined. Rage lit her face as she called Graham. "That jerk cut me off. Completely." "Calm down," Graham soothed, though he himself was starting to panic. He had already lost 3 major clients that day. "Come to the gallery. We'll figure it out." But when Genevieve arrived, Graham was in his own fury. "Someone's telling collectors I'm selling fakes," he snarled. "People are demanding refunds. My reputation." "Your reputation," Genevieve snapped. "I'm the one all over the news. I can't buy coffee without getting hounded. And now I'm broke." "You're still Mrs. Harrington," Graham insisted. "Use that." "How?" "He's frozen every account. Mine, our joint accounts, even my trust fund." Their argument was cut short by Graham's assistant, who rushed in. "Sir, the Peterson collection just canceled their showing, and we got a call from the bank. They're auditing our records." Graham paled. He had been operating in shady corners of the art world for years, relying on charm and contacts to hide discrepancies. "This is Nate," Graham muttered. "He's attacking my business. How could he know?" "Because he's Nathaniel Harrington," Genevieve hissed. "He probably knew everything about you before we." She stopped, realizing with horror that they had gravely underestimated the man she had married. Meanwhile, Nate remained in his office, calm as he read the day's briefings. Genevieve's self-serving interview had backfired spectacularly. His PR team responded by releasing medical records disproving her claims, as well as footage showing her enjoying endless shopping sprees without any sign of abuse. He then fed more evidence of Graham's crooked art dealings to investigators. "Sir," Richard reported, "the Board of Art Authentication is looking into all of Sutton's transactions. They've launched a formal investigation." "Excellent," Nate said. "Let them find everything we've uncovered. Notify our media contacts to stand by. The moment charges are filed, I want it everywhere." He glanced at another screen, streaming video from inside Graham's gallery. Genevieve and Graham were shouting at each other, starting to turn on each other. Perfect. Soon they'd tear themselves apart, exactly as Nate had planned. Allegations against renowned art dealer Graham Sutton continued to snowball as 3 more galleries cut ties with him. Evidence of widespread fraud was emerging. Graham threw his phone across his office, shattering a framed certificate. His hand shook as he poured a third drink. "This is a complete meltdown," he muttered. "A total disaster." Genevieve paced in his office, her designer heels clicking on a marble floor she could no longer afford. "We need to strike back," she insisted. "Nate has weaknesses." "Wake up, Genevieve," Graham barked. "Your husband isn't the clueless code geek we thought. He's been 10 steps ahead of us from the start." Their shouting match was interrupted by a call from Graham's lawyer, on speaker. Each word drained the color from Graham's face. "Graham, the authentication board has conclusive proof of fraud in at least a dozen major pieces. They're freezing all gallery assets while they investigate. And the IRS is involved too. There are tax irregularities going back 5 years. Fix it," Graham demanded. "Fix it? I'm withdrawing as your counsel," the lawyer said. "These charges are just the start. Someone provided the authorities with everything. Bank records, falsified certificates, witness statements." When the call ended, Genevieve turned to Graham, horror spreading across her features. "What did you do? Don't pretend you're innocent. You knew exactly what I was when you came to me. Just like I knew you were a social climber who got caught." Graham's eyes blazed with resentment. "I only wanted Harrington's influence. You were just a means to that end." "I trusted you," Genevieve cried. "You told me we'd bring Nate down together. And you believed me. I wanted his money, his connections. Now we're both ruined, thanks to your TV confessions." Genevieve slapped him, the sharp sound echoing through the gallery, just as Graham's assistant burst in. "Sir, there are federal agents in the lobby with a search warrant." Panic set in. Graham scrambled to delete files, while Genevieve ran outside to find her car wouldn't start. Her phone had been shut off. Her credit cards were useless at local hotels. Meanwhile, Nate watched it all through various screens, satisfied. Each desperate step they took only tightened the net around them. Later that evening, Graham met with a figure in a disreputable bar, paying what little remained of his funds to solve the Harrington problem permanently. He spoke too freely, not knowing the hired gun was actually an ex-federal agent working for Nate. Every word was recorded. Back at the gallery, federal agents raided what was left of Graham's operation, seizing forged art and fraudulent records. His parents, upon seeing the scandal, disowned him. Genevieve could not secure a single hotel room. Once revered by high society, she found doors slammed in her face. The same people who toasted her at lavish parties now posted articles condemning her. She tried contacting Nate's lawyer to tell her side, but got a curt reply that Mr. Harrington wanted no further communication. Ever. Some might have pitied them, but not Nate. Let them flail. Let them feel the ground crumble beneath their feet. Their attempt to hire someone to harm him was the final nail in their coffin, guaranteeing that everything he did next would have a righteous, ironclad justification. The Harrington Tech press room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from major networks filled every seat, cameras focused on the stage. Nathaniel Harrington stepped to the podium, his charcoal suit exuding authority. His expression was carved from stone. "Thank you for coming," he began. "Recent weeks have been filled with accusations regarding my business, my personal life, and me. Today, I'm here to address everything directly." In a grimy motel room, Genevieve watched the live feed, dread coiling in her gut. Graham paced anxiously beside her, looking disheveled and panicked. "Turn it off," he hissed. "No," she whispered, eyes fixed on the screen. "We need to know what he's doing." On stage, Nate activated a large monitor behind him. "First, regarding abuse claims made by my wife, Genevieve Sterling Harrington." Security footage played of Genevieve on various shopping sprees, her transactions displayed in detail, proving she had unlimited access to finances. "As you see," Nate continued, "Genevieve enjoyed complete freedom. Her allegations are baseless, but that's just the beginning." Next came surveillance of Genevieve and Graham together, at restaurants, hotels, the secluded cabin. Text messages, call logs, and receipts confirmed the affair. While my mother was gravely ill, Nate said, voice growing steely, my wife indulged in an affair. And when I needed help, she mocked me. But there is more. Evidence of Graham's long-running art fraud lit the screen. Forged certificates, doctored bank transfers, insider confessions. Journalists gasped. 3 major authorities had already seized over 100 suspicious pieces from Graham's gallery. Nate let the reaction swell, then delivered another bombshell. Most disturbing is this recent development. The video of Graham conspiring at the bar played. His voice was unmistakable, describing how he wanted Nate taken out, be it an accident or mugging. The audience erupted in shock. In the motel, Genevieve turned on Graham. You wanted him killed. You left me no choice. He ruined us. Graham retorted, face pale. On stage, Nate concluded, I am providing every bit of evidence to authorities. I will also be funding the Celeste Harrington Foundation with an additional $100 million in memory of my mother. Its mission is to protect victims of both domestic abuse and financial fraud. Reporters fired questions at him all at once, but Nate simply walked away. In their shabby room, Genevieve and Graham stared at each other in horror. Their secrets and plots had just been exposed to the world. This isn't over, Graham snarled, grabbing his coat. I still have a few contacts. He never finished the sentence before agents pounded on the door. Federal agents, open up. We have a warrant. Genevieve saw Richard outside in an unmarked vehicle. He was on the phone, quietly reporting. Target secured, sir. Operation complete. In his office, Nate ended the call and turned to a bank of monitors showing Genevieve and Graham being hauled away in cuffs. Everything had gone according to plan. He gazed at a photograph of his mother. It's done, Mom, he said softly. They'll never hurt anyone again. Table 6 needs their check, barked the cafe manager, jolting Genevieve from her thoughts as she wiped crumbs off the sticky counter. 10 years had passed since the press conference that had exposed her wrongdoing to the world, but she still heard mutters of, isn't that the woman who cheated on Nate Harrington while his mother was dying? Mortified, she scurried to drop off the bill, feeling the stares and hushed commentary. Once she had reigned over glittering parties. Now she lived in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper, wearing second-hand shoes. Across town, Graham Sutton scrubbed dishes in a dingy diner. Former employees he'd once browbeaten sneered. They had nicknamed him the sham artist, relishing every chance to deride the man who had duped so many prominent buyers. No one wanted to exhibit his art, even under an alias. His fraud scandal was too big, the stench too foul. In his corner office at Harrington Tech, Nate calmly reviewed the latest surveillance updates on the ex-wife and her lover. Even after a decade, he paid to monitor their every move, ensuring they never fully regained their footing. Some might find it excessive, but Nate believed in thoroughness. They had wronged him when he was most vulnerable, so they would continue to pay. Sir, Richard announced, entering with a set of papers. Sutton tried applying for a restaurant manager position. As you requested, we made sure he wasn't hired. What about Genevieve? Nate asked, skimming a photo of her hunched form in a cheap uniform. She's still at the cafe. She attempted to reach out to her family last week. They refused all contact. Keep me informed, Nate said, returning the file. He no longer felt much emotion regarding either of them, only a cool satisfaction in seeing justice served over time. The Celeste Harrington Foundation was thriving, awarding grants, opening shelters for abuse survivors, and pushing for stricter fraud laws. The press called Nate an inspirational figure who had turned personal tragedy into public good. They had no idea he also held the reins of a shadow system that destroyed any future Genevieve or Graham might attempt to build. They had chosen betrayal, and Nathaniel Harrington would see that they suffered its consequences forever. 3 years of humiliation had twisted Graham Sutton's suave demeanor into pure hatred. Desperation drove him to track Nate's routine to a secluded beach house. One bullet, Graham thought, would fix everything. But the moment he stepped onto the property, armed security surrounded him. Richard emerged from the shadows. "Mr. Sutton, did you really think we wouldn't be watching?" he asked as Graham spun around, pointing a shaky gun that never got fired. Nate stepped forward, calm contempt in his gaze. "Graham," he said, "still making poor decisions, I see." "You ruined my life," Graham spat. "My career, my reputation." "No," Nate replied. "You ruined yourself. I only provided the consequences." He signaled to his security, "Take him to the prepared location. Make sure he's comfortable. He'll be there a long time." As Graham was dragged away, struggling, Nate's voice followed. "You invite my success. Now you'll spend your days as my prisoner." Indeed, the remote compound to which Graham was taken was a prison in all but name. Staffed by armed guards, it offered creature comforts, spacious rooms, gardens, fine meals, but restricted every movement. Cut off from the outside world, Graham languished in his private purgatory. The world would assume he had fled in disgrace to avoid criminal charges, a rumor Nate quietly encouraged. Meanwhile, Genevieve toiled away in menial service jobs. Whenever she tried to find better work, her past surfaced, or the employer mysteriously withdrew the offer. Her once enchanting beauty had faded under stress and scorn. The young baristas at her cafe barely recognized her, except when they swapped gossip about the fallen trophy wife from the old news stories. She would forever be an object of ridicule and pity. Nate, for his part, had grown even stronger. Business profiles described him as brilliant but ruthless. The Celeste Harrington Foundation was a model philanthropic enterprise. To the public, he was a visionary CEO who emerged from personal tragedy to champion worthy causes. The only reminder of the cold hatred in his heart was the private feed he occasionally checked, confirming that Genevieve and Graham were still suffering. A decade passed after Celeste Harrington's death. Her son stood at a podium, accepting another humanitarian award for the foundation's work. "My mother taught me that justice must always be served," Nate's voice rang out. The Celeste Harrington Foundation honors her spirit by supporting those targeted by abusers and fraudsters. Camera flashes ignited the stage. In a small, grim apartment, Genevieve watched the speech on a battered television. She had grown older in every way. Stooped posture, worn hands, hollow cheeks. She rarely tried to contact former friends anymore. Most had severed ties the moment her scandal became public. She wondered if she should move to another state or even another country, but deep down she sensed Nate's influence would reach her no matter where she went. Graham settled into permanent captivity. After years of trying to charm guards, break routines, or plan escapes, he resigned himself to painting the same bleak landscapes over and over. Even if he found a way out, Harrington's reach was too vast. As far as the world was concerned, Graham Sutton no longer existed. Nate had transformed Redwood Corridor's business scene, building Harrington Tech into a titan of AI, quantum computing, and security. The foundation, meanwhile, reshaped legal approaches to domestic abuse and financial crimes. His mother's memory lived on through the charitable branches, while his personal vendetta endured through the silent strangulation of his enemies' hopes. 20 years after Celeste Harrington's funeral, Harrington Tech's headquarters dominated the skyline. In his top-floor office, Nate reviewed an update from Richard, now Chief of Global Security. "Quarterly surveillance, sir," Richard said, laying out photos. "Subjects remain contained." Nate studied the pictures. The first showed Genevieve, hair streaked with gray, wearing a stained uniform while washing dishes before dawn at the cafe. She tried to apply for a teaching aide position at a community college, but the interview was canceled once her name surfaced in the background check. He flipped to the next report. Graham Sutton in the lush but fenced-in compound. He had enough supplies to paint daily, a library to read from, even a small garden to occupy himself, but no freedom. He requested more books on classical techniques, Richard noted. Monthly psych evaluations indicate sustained depression, but he's not considered a suicide risk. Nate nodded. Maintain the current protocol. Have there been any communications between them? None for 5 years, Richard replied. Any letters they attempt to send still get intercepted. Nate closed the folders, satisfied. 2 decades had passed, and his revenge was as relentless as the day it began. He had proven that no one could betray him without paying a permanent price. A notification chimed, a message from his adopted son, Oliver Harrington. "Dad, I've reviewed the Foundation's new data. I've got ideas for expanding our fraud prevention initiative." Nate smiled. He had taken Oliver under his wing after discovering he had lost his parents to a Ponzi scheme, a cause that aligned with the Celeste Harrington Foundation's mission. Oliver showed the same analytical brilliance and drive to protect the vulnerable. That afternoon, Nate met Oliver for lunch at a private restaurant. The young man had an air of confidence and intelligence that Nate admired. "Dad," Oliver said, "I found patterns in the Foundation's data. It's all connected to betrayal and exploitation. This is more than just random philanthropy, isn't it?" Nate gave a measured nod. "You've always been perceptive. Our family knows how destructive fraud and abuse can be. I want to expand our surveillance methods," Oliver continued, eyes bright with determination. "Use AI to stop betrayals before they start. We can help even more people that way." Nate felt a surge of pride. "We'll review your proposals with the board," he said, seeing in Oliver a worthy heir to the Harrington legacy, both the public work and the hidden truths. Later that evening, Nathaniel Harrington visited his mother's grave, as he did every week. The tranquil memorial garden, financed by the Foundation, offered a quiet refuge from the world. "He understands, Mom," Nate said softly. "Oliver will continue your legacy. The Foundation grows stronger every year, and those who hurt us, they remain where they belong." Across the city, Genevieve dragged her exhausted body home after another grueling shift. She passed by a small newsstand displaying a business magazine, its cover showing a smiling Nathaniel Harrington at a charity gala. Even now, reporters lauded him for his generosity. She couldn't bear to look. Meanwhile, Graham finished another lonely painting, setting his brush aside with trembling hands, imprisoned in a paradise he could never leave. Yes, the Redwood Corridor had evolved, new companies rising and falling, but one truth stayed unshakable. Nathaniel Harrington never forgot a betrayal. He might smile for the cameras, build philanthropic ventures, and advance technology for the public good, but behind it all, he made certain Genevieve Sterling Harrington and Graham Sutton lived out their days in defeat. Their punishment was eternal. Their regrets and memories would haunt them forever. Nate had fulfilled his promise to Celeste. He had honored her memory with the Celeste Harrington Foundation, building shelters, advocating for victims, championing anti-fraud legislation. And he had kept his private vow. Those who betrayed him would never escape the ruin they invited upon themselves. Publicly lauded, privately feared, Nathaniel Harrington stood as living proof that vengeance could be woven seamlessly into philanthropy, and that some debts could never truly be paid. He had become what they made him: unyielding, powerful, and utterly unforgiving. And in some quiet corner of eternity, Nate believed Celeste Harrington was smiling with approval at all he had done.